Hey gang, not too long ago I did a MicroClouser video, and I did that MicroClouser with calf tail. And I mentioned when I was doing the intro to that video that there were a lot of other types of materials that you could use for those MicroClousers. And one of the things I mentioned was bunny hair, and I thought I'd do one of those for you today. The kind of cool thing about the bunny hair Clousers is it allows you to get even smaller yet than the calf tail MicroClouser. Today we're going to be working on a size 14 hook. And you can see that's just a very small, very compact fly. You can use lead barbell eyes like I've used on this one. You can also use bead chain eyes if you're not feeling like you're going to need to get as deep. But this is a really good pattern for the spring of the year, kind of post-spawn after it's a few crappie have spawned, bluegill have spawned, any kind of fish after they've spawned and the eggs are starting to hatch and there's a lot of fry and smaller fish in the water. This can be a very important niche that doesn't get covered very well by a lot of flies. So by downsizing the Clouser to this extent, it gives us a good fry type size bait fish pattern that we can use. And just about everything out there is going to be eating those when they're in the water. From other bluegills and smaller fish, right on up to bass, carp, catfish, trout. Just about anything out there is gonna be taking advantage of this food source. So, without going into too much more of that, let's go ahead and get started. We're working on a size 14 hook, like I mentioned. In this particular case, it's a Firehole 633 in a size 14. This is just a relatively standard nymph wet hook. One thing I do like about the Fireholes is it's a 2 extra wide gap. So like I was showing you on this one, that extra wide gap gives you lots of hook clearance for if bigger fish come along and gobble up that little fly, you'll have a better chance of getting a good hook set that way. So we're going to take that Firehole 633 in the vise, and then we're going to take our thread. In this case, it's a white Vivus and a 6/0. Doesn't really matter. I like white because I use white bellies on a lot of my Clouser minnows, and the white's always going to match some part of that fly. But you could use any color thread you wanted. Really, you could match the other colors that you were going to be using in that fly. Say if it was going to be a white and chartreuse, you could use chartreuse thread. You could do contrasting colors. You know, you could maybe do orange or something like that for a hot spot. Notice I've come back awful far starting that thread. I've come back almost halfway down the hook. Just like any Clouser minnow, you want to leave plenty of room ahead of between the eye of the hook and the eyes of the fly for any kind of material buildup or thread buildup. But on these small hooks, that becomes even more critical. And we're also using a fairly short material today too, so we don't have a lot of room. So we're going to start that eye fairly far back. We're going to use bead chain eye for this one, and this is just a standard black bead chain that I cut off of a length of bead chain pole cord from a lamp. And we're just going to take that bead chain and we're going to lay it in. We're going to tie it in just like we would a set of barbell eyes. One thing I like about bead chain on these is that it doesn't have quite as thick a neck as the lead barbell eyes do, which again, as I mentioned before, we're dealing with some shorter materials this time, so we don't have quite as much leeway, and not having to go over that big hump on that barbell is going to make those materials a little easier to tie in. Notice after I did my cross hatches on those barbell eyes, I had taken some horizontal wraps here. That's just to make sure that everything is down nice and solid. Might even take a couple more X wraps there just to make sure those are in there. Okay, yeah, that's on there nice and tight, ready to go. And so, unlike a lot of bunny flies that you see out there, zonkers, bunny Clousers, double bunnies, bigger streamers, we're not going to be using the hair on the strip like this. We're going to actually be using the hair as it is, almost like you would bucktail or any other material. We're going to be taking it off the hide. So you don't have to have zonker strips. You can have just chunks of rabbit fur on the hide. These are out of a grab bag that I got at some point, but you can find rabbit skin hides at craft stores, fly shops, just about a lot of different places. But the trick here is going to be to find the longest hairs that we can on a particular piece of hide. This is a 14 hook, which is pretty small, but rabbit hair is pretty short too, so it's going to be a little bit of a toss-up there. So we're going to kind of look around the hide, and we're going to look for some really long hairs. It looks like the longest hairs I'm finding are up on this corner here. So we're just going to take a clump of those and kind of separate them out. Take the scissors, and just like dealing with any hide, we're going to get that fur off of there as close to the hide as we can, so that the next time we've got full lengths to work with. And so that's going to give us a little clump. Like I said, not a whole lot of room to work with there. He's going to be just about barely long enough. I'm going to go ahead and clean some of the little fuzzies out of there. Just get as much of that little kind of dubbing fuzz out of there as we can. Doesn't have to all come out. Rabbit hair is pretty compressible, so it's not going to be a big problem if it builds up a little. And we're going to take that clump of rabbit, and we're just going to pinch it with the fingers of the offhand. This is going to be a little different. Normally we'd lay materials in this way, but so that we can use all of the length we can, we're going to get that pinched with our fingers there, and we're going to lay it on this way. And then just take a couple of quick, fairly tight wraps just to make sure we've got that down. And then we're going to come back behind the eye and cinch that down good. We're not going to go back any, because we want this to have some nice fuzzy bulk to it, so that it has as much movement as possible in the water. Then we're going to come back to the front of the eye again, and we're going to trim this off. We're just going to come in at a bias and snip that off. In this particular case, it's a down eye hook, so I could use the bevel of the hook as a good measure. And we're just going to take enough wraps to kind of bind that down. We're not going to really worry about making it neat, because the rest of this fly is going to be tied right there, so that's all going to get covered up. And we don't want to bulk the thread up, because we are dealing with a fairly small hook. Then we're going to roll that fly over in the vise, and we're going to take a little bit of flash material. In this case, since it's a small fly, we're going to go with the finer midge flash rather than a crystal flash material. And we're just going to take a few strands of that. And we're only going to take a few, because we're going to double this over so that we can use as much of the length of that as possible. And we're going to lay that in, and we want that to be just about the same length, or maybe just a little bit longer, just like on a standard Clouser. We want that to get all the way out to the tail for us. We're just going to again take a couple of wraps of that. Trim it off. And then we're going to take what's left, and we're going to clip it in our hackle pliers to save for later, because there's about enough there to do that again, so we can get a second fly out of that. We're going to finish lashing this down. And then we're going to take our top color. In this particular case, we're going to go for kind of a gray, sort of a shad type gray. That's just a really pretty piece of shad gray that happened to be in that grab bag, so we're going to use it. Again, this one has some really nice lengths, so we're not going to have any trouble here. But we're going to take off a clump of that. Nice little bushy clump. If it's, you notice it's kind of flying away and it's kind of staticky there. If it gets too out of control, you can just take a little saliva on your fingers and kind of tame it back down. I don't like to get it too wet, because I want to get kind of a good idea of how much bulk I do have there. In fact, here I think I have just a little too much, so we're going to thin that out just a little bit. Try not to knock over too much of my equipment, if you heard that in the background there. Then we're just going to take that, and we're going to measure it out to the same length as our tail. Get that just about the same length. And we're going to tie that in just ahead of the barbells, like we would bucktail. Again, notice I'm holding it in the offhand instead of the vice hand. We're just going to lay that in there, get a couple of wraps. And here we had plenty of length, so we wouldn't really have to worry too much, but we're going to get in there and we're going to trim that off. And then all we've got to do now is take our thread, finish binding that down. And you notice since we set those eyes back as far as we did, we don't have any trouble with crowding the eye of the hook on that fly. We're going to take that. We can get on there with the whip finisher if we can hold on to it. Give myself a little more thread to work with. Get a quick 3 or 4 turn whip finish on there. Notice I'm putting it up towards the eyes, and the only reason I'm doing that is so that we don't pile up a bunch of thread down here at the eye of the hook and accidentally crowd it. We're going to trim that off, and we're basically done. We've pretty much got our minnow tied there. Looking pretty good. Minnow, or in this case with the gray, I guess maybe baby shad. Just to reinforce it, we're going to take and we're going to put on just a little bit, just a tiny, tiny, tiny smidge of the UV resin. Most of my Clousers I go over the top too, but I'm not going to worry about that with the bunny. That's tied in pretty good. It's not as brittle as the bucktail, so we don't have to worry about it breaking. So we can just worry about sealing that thread, so that this fly can take as much abuse as possible without coming apart on us. And there you have it. Maybe get rid of a couple of fuzzies there that stuck on. There's our finished fly, our bunny Clouser, our bunny MicroClouser. Clouser fly, or Clouser fry as the case might be at this size. Hope you give it a chance. Hope you have good luck with it. Tight lines. We'll see you in the next one.